Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here today. So over the last several weeks, as I gave the message last week on covenants, I've been studying quite a bit about covenants. And as I was studying it, I was reminded about a topic that I've thought about many times in the past. It's a relatively small thing. As we'll go through it, we'll actually read every verse associated with it in the Bible. It's actually mentioned only 4 times. But it was something when I first studied it many years ago that it made me think a little bit differently about God and his creation and what God is doing with us and for us in his creation. So to get started, let's turn back to Genesis 9. And in Genesis 9, if you recall, this is the story about Noah and the flood and the ark. And in Genesis 9, this is at the very end of that story. God has brought Noah and his family through the flood safely. He's landed them, and he's opened up the ark, and he brings Noah and all the animals and his family out. And then he makes a covenant with Noah. He makes a covenant that he'll never again flood the earth like he had just done, that he won't destroy mankind or all living things in that way again. And we'll pick it up here in Genesis 9. We'll pick up in verse 12. It says, "And God said, 'This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations.'" And in verse 13 it says, "I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring forth a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, 'This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth.'" So we see here that God talks about this rainbow. He talks about it as his rainbow. Have you ever thought about why God calls it his rainbow here? You know, on the surface, we can just look and think that maybe he, miraculously changed the atmosphere or changed how things work so that the rainbow would appear when it rained or when the clouds come. But as we look more about how God talks about, or the Bible talks about the rainbow, it's actually more than this. To begin to kind of understand the full meaning of the rainbow in the Bible, let's turn to Revelation 10. If you turn to Revelation 10, verse 1, we can start to understand that it's more than just a physical thing that God created for Noah, for all mankind, as a sign of his covenant. And we'll begin here in Revelation 10, verse 1. It says, "I say, still another mighty angel coming down from earth, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little book open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land." So here we can start to see that the rainbow is not just something physical. It's actually a physical representation of something that's spiritual. Right here, it's associated with an angel. It's a rainbow on his head. And throughout the Bible, we see many things which are just physical representations of the real spiritual creation that God has created, that God wants us to be a part of. Right? And in all of these cases, it's very important that we understand that it is just a physical representation of something spiritual, because it can help us in this physical realm to better understand what God truly has in store for us, what God truly wants us to understand, right? And we see many places where God will give us something physical and say, this is like something spiritual, right? That those things he makes in the physical realm are just a shadow, a form of what's in the physical or in the spiritual realm. And as I said, there's many examples. There's family, right? There's sacrifices. There's the temple. There's kings and kingdoms. There's fathers. There's marriage. And the list can go on where you look at these physical things that God has given us, and they all point us to something spiritual that he has in store for us. And for something like the rainbow, it's very easy to skip over it and not dig deeper, not to understand or not to think what God is trying to tell us with this rainbow. And it's actually very interesting because as we go on, it tells a lot about the covenant that he made with Noah. It tells a lot about just his physical creation and what he wants us to know and understand. But as everything, we have to look across the whole Bible to really understand it, right? If you just read that account in Noah or just this account in Revelation, you wouldn't start to get the full meaning, the full picture of what God has for us to understand. And as I said, I think this is a simple example, right? God doesn't spend a lot of time on it, but it is part of his word. It is part of what he's done for us. And we're reminded of it almost every year. Like I can remember many times seeing a rainbow and thinking about these things. So now let's dig even deeper. If you turn back just a few chapters to Revelation 4, and we'll pick it up in verse 1. That's Revelation 4, verse 1. It says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this.' Immediately I was in the Spirit." Right? So here John is being transformed in some way from just the physical realm to the spiritual realm. And he's trying to describe what he sees the best he can. And it goes on, it says, "And behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on that throne." All right, so we know who that one is. And then in verse 3 it says, "And he who sat there was like a jasper, a sardis stone in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne in appearance like an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. And from the throne proceeding thunderings or lightnings and thunderings and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which were the 7 spirits of God." So now we see here that the rainbow is not just a physical representation of something spiritual, but it's actually associated with God himself. This rainbow is at his very throne. You can see it as you're looking at his throne. Think about that. Think about that the next time that you see a rainbow in the sky, that with that rainbow, God is actually giving you a glimpse of what we can eventually see at his very throne, what is associated with him. But there's actually even more that comes to the rainbow. If you'll turn back to Ezekiel, it's Ezekiel 1:26 we'll read, and we'll pick it up here. It says, "And above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne." So again, we're talking about God's throne here. "In appearance like a sapphire stone, on the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it." Right? And so we know this is talking about God on his very throne. Continue on in verse 27, it says, "Also from the appearance of his waist and upward I saw, as it were, the color of amber, with the appearance of fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his waist and downward I saw, as it were, the appearance of fire with brightness all around." And then in verse 28 it says, "Like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day." So hearkening back to what he had told Noah, that when it rained and there were clouds, that he would show the rainbow up in the sky. It goes on and says, "So was the appearance of the brightness all around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one speaking." Think about this. Think about what this verse is saying about the rainbow, what we can picture, what we can think about when we see the rainbow in the sky, when we think about the covenant that God made with Noah, right? God, when he made that covenant with Noah, and he used as a sign of that covenant the rainbow, he actually was using a physical representation of his glory. He was saying that that covenant would not go away, would stand forever as long as his glory would stand. And we know that his glory will last forever. And that is what that covenant sign really meant, right? And so when we think about it, when we see this as part of the rainbow, right? Think about the rainbow. When you look at it, what do you think, right? Beautiful, magnificent, glory, right? These are the words at least I think about when I see a rainbow. And when you think and see that rainbow stretching across the sky after the rain, God is showing something similar to us as his glory. God is saying, here's a small glimpse of what my full glory really is, right? He's giving us a glimpse of what it's like to see him sitting on his very throne in heaven, right? He's telling us that he made a covenant with us, that he would not destroy the earth through floods and rains as long as his glory stood, right? And we can even start to better understand, now that we have this context, what God means when he says that his way is light. Think about the rainbow. Think about when you look at just the light, right? You see just one color, you see brightness. But what we understand from the rainbow is that light, brightness is much more complex than just brightness, right? It's many things make up that brightness, many things, many colors make up that light. And it is with God's glory, right? We can't just look at one aspect of God, say his love, his mercy, his loving kindnesses, his tender mercies. We can't just look at one aspect and really understand God. It's all of these things brought together in one bright light. And that is what it's talking about, right? That God is more complex than just what's on the surface. And that's one of the things that we can start to understand about God just from this small aspect, this thing that's mentioned just a few times in the Bible and is shown to us only a couple of times of the year, right? But this is what God is showing us, right? And think about that. Think how amazing our God is, that he produced something in the physical realm to help us understand his glory, right? How much does he love us? How much does he want us to know him? How much does he want us to dig deep into his word to fully understand him? I know for me, and as I said, I first studied this many years ago, that ever since I've never looked at a rainbow the same way. These are the thoughts in my mind when I read or when I see a rainbow. And it always makes me stop. It makes me think about what God's kingdom will really be like, how magnificent it will be, how much better it will be than this magnificent physical representation. But that when we see that real, true, eternal rainbow, right, which is the very glory of God at his throne, it just makes me stop and think and praise God.